Hey everybody, we're the good doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
I am Dr. Kristen.
And welcome to our next month of history, heritage, whatever we feel like talking about. This month is February. We're sticking with our good old standard Black History Month because you know what? It's been around for a while and there's still a lot of stories that haven't been told and perspectives that haven't been covered. So we're going to stick with Black History Month for this month, and we are specifically spending time on the continent of Africa in 4 different countries, looking at stories that highlight women's experiences in these places. So we spend a lot of time looking at women's experiences all around the world and what gender looks like and how it is performed all over the world. And so we wanted to specify our Black History Month just a little bit this time around. So we're going to be in Uganda, Nigeria, Liberia, and Egypt throughout the month. We're starting first in Uganda with a delightful film on Disney Plus called Queen of Katwe. But first, I want to give Dr. Kristen a few moments to talk about one of her favorite places on this world, parts of Africa that she has been to, and what it means to her.
I know it seems like I've been everywhere on the planet, but it's really just that we keep covering places I've been. When we start to get to like South America, once we get farther south than Colombia, I haven't been anywhere. So don't worry, this isn't going to become
lots of parts of like Southeast Asia.
Yeah, outside of India, like I've spent a couple days in Hong Kong, and my husband and I like stomp around. We were in Shanghai for 2 whole days. So, in which I got very sick. I'm very allergic to Shanghai. The air, not the people. Clarify. So, really briefly, for anybody who went, right, they want to talk about Black History Month, but they're going to Egypt. So this is kind of a way in which I just want to say briefly that we're both focusing and widening. So one of my biggest pet peeves on the planet is when people refer to Africa as a country. Like someone is from Africa, like they're not. They're from the country that is, and they're from their village, and they're from all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And Western folks, especially Americans.
Yeah, and I think too a big problem we have in America is assuming that all Black people are African Americans.
Yes.
Like making that a circle on the top of a circle, and it's not at all. So exploring what Blackness means in other parts of the world is a huge part of this.
Also, because very frequently all races are defined against other races. So whiteness is a bit of a outlier in that, because we define what race is as a race in a terrible way, but that's a unique thing to our melanin level. So the thing with talking about Africa is that it's a lot of countries, and it's a lot of countries that were made up by other countries. And the history of colonialism is not history there. It is still happening. In the same way that it is still happening in India, colonialism is still happening in the Philippines. It is still happening. It's still happening in America. It's still happening in Canada. Colonialism is a present tense entity. Within the continent of Africa, you often hear people divide African subcultures by being above or below the Sahara Desert. So very, very few folks live in the Sahara Desert. Perhaps you know, because it's a desert, it's very difficult to live in a desert. But so pretty much above the desert is much more Arab countries and Arab heritage, and a lot of Islam, and Morocco and Tunisia and Egypt are all above this. And when you think of like the Middle East, it's actually probably you're thinking of places like Morocco, because that's where Hollywood films Middle Eastern scenes. So then you get below the Sahara Desert, and the whole topography changes. For instance, in Rwanda, there's times I opened my eyes and I thought I was in Hawaii. It's just so incredibly green and lush. And in South Africa, where places I've been in South Africa looked like Ireland. So it's very, very topographically diverse. The largest waterfall in the world is in Africa, etc. So we want to concentrate on 3 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, which is a part of the continent that has been soaked in other people's blood for a very long time. And the legacy of that is very big. a lot of the stories about women that come out of Africa, just like around the rest of the world, are all really terrible and tragic. And so finding stories that were stories of humanity was definitely challenging in this month for sure. And I am particularly attuned to this because I have had the privilege of going several times. When I was in graduate school at Baylor University, there was a great push to make sure that every student could have a cross-cultural experience if they wanted one, a trans-international experience. So I got the chance to go to Kenya and Rwanda. And then from there, it kind of snowballed. And I now have the privilege of sitting on the board of directors of an organization called Urban Promise International that starts youth work-based, educational-based nonprofits around the world. And we have a lot in Malawi and a couple in Uganda and Kenya, Liberia, Nigeria. And Malawi is kind of the heart, but there are Honduras and Little Rock, Arkansas, and Toronto and Vancouver and Camden, New Jersey, and they're kind of all over the place. But because of my work with Urban and because of my experience at Baylor, I've gotten to go to Johannesburg as well. I've gotten to spend time in Malawi. I've gotten to spend time in Kenya and Rwanda the most. I was supposed to go to Uganda this year or in 2020. And maybe possibly would have gone to Katwe myself. The people that I was visiting live outside of Kampala. So I'm not sure I would have gone. But the process, the very first trip I took to Kenya and Rwanda just changed who I was and the entire trajectory of my life and I joke that I left my heart in Africa and I may never reclaim it. I left part of it in Belfast and part of it in Kigali, Rwanda. And I don't know if I'll ever get them back, but it's a huge, it is a rich place that deserves its own dignity and is very rarely afforded it. The entire continent is that way. So in going to Uganda really quickly, Uganda is a former British colony. I've been in a couple different colonies and they feel a little different.
Sure they do.
British colonies all feel the same, whether it's India or Malawi or it's this very, I don't know, you can just like tell the Queen's people have been there and it just feels really different than the Francophone ones that I went to. And not just the fact that like a lot of people speak English or they teach English in schools. Excuse me. But also in how their governments are set up and kind of how the hangovers from colonialism. Uganda has an incredibly specific history of dictatorships and the government structure. But there's not a lot of countries in sub-Saharan Africa that have had true freedom to rule themselves since the white people showed up in the 1800s. And for any host of reasons that we can or cannot get into. The reason I really love this particular movie is that it's a really small story. It's this one really beautiful story of a teenage girl. And yet it feels like the story of every woman that grows up in a slum in Uganda. And very, very universal in that way. Katwe is the name of the slum. Slum is not a slur in this word, by the way. It is how groups of houses are referred to. Usually means that there's no running water, there's no electricity, there's definitely organization. People have streets and addresses within this, but there's not a lot of, it's very often that people that there's almost like no home ownership within the slum. You rent from other people. I remember the very first time I was in Kenya in a slum there, and the room was about the size of 2 American bathrooms put together, like 2 downstairs American bathrooms put together. And it was $6 rent a month. And it was one of the more expensive houses in that particular area. And it was very difficult for the family living in it to make ends meet to keep that roof over their head. And then and we were helping them figure out how to get training for some sustainable businesses, teach the mom to sew, for instance, so she could take in some work to get $6. And that is a lot of what Lupita Nyong'o's character in this movie faces, is how to earn a living and how to take care of her family and how to still do all of these things with dignity. Sexual assault is incredibly rampant in poor parts of the world everywhere. This is not a secret. In barrios in Brazil and Colombia and Argentina, in slums in Mumbai and Kampala, consent towards sex is always a murky thing, because if if it's the only way to put food on your table, is it consent?
Mm-hmm.
And we can have those kind of very complicated conversations. So you have this, so that's one of the major stories in Queen of Katwe, is Lupita Nyong'o as the mom, struggling with how to be a mom and how to be a woman and how to be a human being. And then you have Phoebe, who is our heroine.
Phiona.
Did I say Phoebe? I apologize. Phiona, who is our heroine, who reminded me of so many girls that I met, and is presented with some of those incredibly difficult choices that her mother is presented with. So that's kind of my opening salvo, as it were. Dr. Erin, what things did you find particularly interesting in this film?
Yeah, so I mean, I think obviously centering the stories of women as we're doing through this exploration of Black History Month, you know, this is such a rich movie for the purposes of that, and it does so much of it subtly. We've encountered this filmmaker before, literally in our last Immigrant Awareness Month, in our last video when we did The Namesake. And so Miraner tells very similar stories in terms of the way she films things. Mm-hmm. They're long movies. They're very slow moving. She loves a lot of context, and she's very adept at world building. In my personal opinion, she does too much world building and not enough advancing the story. Yeah. But it feels incredibly authentic. And, you know, Namesake felt like you were at times watching real life, not a documentary, but real life. And Queen of Katwe feels like that the entire time. And it's done extraordinarily empathetically. It is not poverty porn. This is what life looks like. And this is how people find joy and have pain in this part of the world. And these are the choices they have to make, and particularly for women. And so you look at Lupita Nyong'o's character, her eldest daughter, who is in and out of an unhealthy relationship, and ends up at the end of the movie having a baby with that man, and looking at her choices and her interaction with her mother on the same choices. And for me, I think what was so powerful about the character that Lupita Nyong'o played was how she was trying to live a life of dignity and take care of her children, being widowed without making any of the choices that she didn't want to have to make in terms of her own body and agency, and engaging in sex in order to help her family survive. And so and you see how really difficult that is all the time for her. And it's one of those kind of stories where every time you think their world has gotten bad enough, something else happens. But again, it's not done to make you feel like I don't want to say I didn't feel bad watching it, because you feel like, oh my God, that's horrible. But it's not in a way that's judgmental. It's a fine line to walk. And I think this filmmaker is very good at doing it. Mm-hmm. Even if her movies feel like days of my life.
And what I think is so interesting too about, like, we've talked a lot about Lupita Nyong'o because she was a character I think we both resonated with. First of all, because we're not chess geniuses.
I mean, I watched The Queen's Gambit, so I knew a lot more about this world than I did prior to The Queen's Gambit.
But also just because, like, we're in her age group and all that kind of stuff. But fundamentally, this story is about Phiona, who is such a prodigy that the local missionary, who's played by David Oyelowo, and this is a Disney movie, by the way, and it is a Disney movie.
It is a Disney movie.
Like, all we're missing is Denzel Washington giving a rousing speech, and it's a Disney movie. So,
or like animals that talk.
Or animals that talk, right? So, she's so good at this, and not only that she is so good at this, but that he is so good at teaching people how to play chess, which is another piece of this, that kids from the Katwe slum get to go and compete. And she keeps going, like, she goes worldwide. She's really well known. And this is a bit of a story. This was based on a book that somebody else wrote about this very famous story. And you get to meet all the real life people at the end over the credits, which I really loved.
I loved that.
And so, like, fundamentally, this story is about that statement. It's about a teenage girl who is so good at chess, she blows everybody away.
Yeah.
Because no story is simple. This is also the story of David Owoleo's character trying to figure out, like, he's a genius in his own right, and he could be making a ton of money doing something else, but he's called to these kids. Mm-hmm. And so what does it mean to take care of a calling and to take care of your family? And what does it mean to be able to look yourself in the mirror at the end of the day? And all of those complicated leadership questions that a lot of us ask ourselves, especially in these times. It's an almost accidentally prescient movie for what sacrifices are you supposed to make, and what does that kind of look like? And so, but those are the two kind of outlying pillars.
Yeah.
And in the middle of it, you get it all from Fiona's perspective.
Yeah.
And Phiona is aware of her mother's life and is aware of it. And at one point in the conversation with David Owoleo's character says, like, listen, it's chess or men.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have another option. It doesn't matter how good I am at school. School gets me nowhere.
And like, she wasn't, she
wasn't necessarily mad. She was really just like, you crazy man. Like, this is my life.
Why? And it was so fascinating to watch her character evolve from learning what chess is and thinking chess was her way out of Katwe, going and experiencing, they go to a tournament in Sudan and they win, and they get to have ketchup and milkshakes and all of these things, and see this other world. And then they come back to Katwe, and like, she's so disjointed and she can't find her center. She's so ungrounded. And her mother like goes to Robert and says, like, you can't do this to her. She's a ghost and she can't live in between these two worlds. And I'm not sure this chess world is going to work out for her. And so watching her take that journey, and then she, Phiona gets to the point where she's like, I have to do this, but I have to do it as myself. And this is the reality that I face. So I need to make chess work so that I don't end up in a situation
like my sister,
like in a way like her sister. Yeah.
I mean, and I think that the movie tells us that I believe the movie is telling us that that's her comparison.
Yeah.
That like her driving factor, just in how the camera work works and how you zero in on some of the stories. I believe that's what the movie is telling us, is that it's chess or her sister's life. And that's the choice she feels she has.
And like, she's never been to school because they can't afford it, and she doesn't know how to read. And so she can play chess, but she can't read the chess books, and like all of the little things that go into what she has to do to be able to compete at the level that all these other kids do. So in a really gentle way, it deals with some class issues, not in a way that interrogates them, but in a way that says, like, this is a reality, especially for, and I think like as Westerners looking at parts of Africa, we tend to always think that it's, bush people, or like Africa gets reduced to a lot of stereotypes. And so we don't explore class differences as Westerners because we look at Africa and see poverty. And so
there's so many class differences.
There's so many class differences. And like, it's very similar with India and the caste system and things that I've learned as I've started to explore these other places. So I think there's a lot of value in what Queen of Katwe does in that it humanizes life, that like, no, it's very different from what your life looks like, but society functions similarly and humans function similarly. And there's discrimination and class differences and, biases against not having a family that is known in Kampala. And so you can't get a job. That's not very different from how some people would experience life in this part of the world. But it was a low-key part of this movie that I really appreciated. And again, I think the filmmaker is really good at being honest and empathetic at the same time.
And for me too, for any of you who are watching us and joining us, and there's ways that you would like to get your kids into these kind of conversations, or you're a teacher, and I think this might be the very first movie that we've ever talked about that is totally kid appropriate. And
you know what? I think you're right.
And it's a really...
Except Coco. We did talk about Coco.
Oh, we did talk about Coco. Yes, that's right. So, okay. Coco aside.
But that might be only those two.
Might be only those two. But I was struck with... So one of the pieces of my life journey has been when I go and see these places, I experience these, and I'll be talking to people who lived there, and I kind of say like, so what do you want me to do now? Like, now that you've been really gracious and shared your life with me, like, what do you want my reaction to be in a certain way, especially when I was younger and trying to figure out that balance. And the answer is always tell my story. The answer is always like, tell people that there are human beings in Malawi, tell people that it's 2021 in Uganda too, tell people that, like, when I say that I heard from one of our staff members from Urban Promise today, sometimes I can tell people are trying to figure out like if I got a letter or not. I'm like, no, I had a WhatsApp from them and it was a video of all the kids. Like, it's 2021 there too.
2021 in Uganda as well. Yeah.
And so, but part of my calling on the planet is to bear witness and kind of also talk about these things. And so finding resources to help people know what it looks like and because you can never know what it feels and smells like. Like, those are tangible things that you have to do when you go there. And yeah, I will never, ever for the rest of my life forget what Kajabi, which is the slum in Nairobi, I spent a lot of time in. I'll never forget what it smells like. It doesn't smell great. P.S. Does not smell great. But like, soap isn't, if you have to choose soap or food, I do hope you choose food. I desperately hope you choose food. And it infuriates me that people are in the position that they have to do that. So my reaction to that is to do what I can to make sure that less people have to make that choice when I'm dead than before I was born. And that's kind of how we go. And this movie, I think, is a good way to help that along.
Yeah.
Because it shows authentically, and again, without judgment. And it's for people who are hard of hearing and struggle with accents. The captions are really well done, and kind of all of those things. It's an accessible entry into a world that few other people will encounter.
Yeah.
And I've already told several of my teacher friends that I hope they show this in school, because it's just really good.
Yeah, it's a great way to start a conversation. And I think, as we continue to explore different ways to sit with other people's stories through our Heritage and History Months, we're always really excited when we find more recent films, or even films that, aren't as well known, that might not be as recent, that can do that in a way that is very different than what Dr. Kristen and I would have grown up seeing in terms of representations of the beautiful tapestry of African humanity and all of these countries and cultures and languages that exist. So it's always really great to find something and be like, yeah, I can tell people to watch that. And it's it's not going to be stereotype building, and it's not poverty porn, and like, yeah, thanks Disney for making that. Like,
thanks for paying for this one. Yeah.
Thanks for funding it. And let me tell you, like, finding a film about women in Africa that is not about rape, sexual violence, or AIDS is really, really hard. So again, thanks for that. And yeah, so I think hopefully everybody else who watches this or who watched this film finds it as educational as we did. We're not going to run at the next Miranair film just because her storytelling ain't my jam. But I will recommend this with all of my cells.
So where do we head next week?
We are heading to Liberia. We're going to look at a documentary that is one of Dr. Kristen's favorites, Pray the Devil Back to Hell.
And it's older. It's from 2006, which in these times means it's at least 400 years old.
It is 400 years old. Yes. It is uplifting, right? It's more uplifting.
I think I find it very uplifting because it's about how women banded.
The title might sound like we're going into one of those dark places.
And it kind of is. It's about the Liberian Civil War, which wasn't great. Great. Let the phrase Civil War alert you to not great stuff. But I found the film when I watched it, and recommend it frequently.
Yes.
A celebration of how women survive.
I was about to say resiliency, yeah.
And the resiliency and their faith aspect. The roles of religion and deity on the continent of Africa is as vast as the country, as the continent itself. And we don't explore that a lot outside of the kind of missionary circles that I grew up in. And so anything that is accessible to explain the integration of culture and faith in a specific place, obviously we're going to draw that to your attention because that's one of the things that we find really important in empathy building, is understanding how the transcendent and the corporeal, how heaven and earth kind of work together, as it were, is really important to us. And that's what this movie is largely about. It's also about people who won Nobel Peace Prizes for things. And we need to know the names of more women who won Nobel Peace Prizes. So next week, you will learn more.
That's right. So I'm very excited. This is a new documentary for me. But we will travel to Liberia with you and hope you will join us for Pray the Devil Back to Hell. And we'll see you guys next week.
Bye, guys.